Hi, this is Anna Steffi, and this is my economic analysis of the housing crisis in Appalachia. So, to understand why Appalachia faces such severe housing instability today, it's important to look at the national housing crisis first. So, across the US, we are currently short somewhere between 3 and 7 million homes, meaning we simply haven't built enough homes to meet demand. And this supply shortage has been building for really over a decade, but the COVID era and inflation only made things worse. And building materials like lumber, steel, concrete have risen between 20 and 40% in price, which is pushing construction costs up. And at the same time, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to fight inflation, which drove mortgage rates from around 3% before the pandemic to about 8% in 2023 and 4. Because of this, affordability has fallen to its lowest point since the 80s. So the average family now needs far more income to purchase the same home compared to just a few years ago. And rent prices have also skyrocketed because when people can't afford to buy homes, they just stay in the rental market longer, which is only increasing demand. So basically, the US has too few homes, raising costs, and higher interest rates. And this national crisis is really setting up the stage for what we're seeing in Appalachia, which is a region that has already been facing deep structural and economic challenges even before the pandemic. So this is just a graph of the 30-year fixed mortgage rates from 2019 to 2024. As you can see, it's drastically gone up, and I just thought it was an interesting graph to include in here. Understanding why Appalachia has entered the crisis already vulnerable. Appalachia has already had severe economic challenges in place, and the decline. This is really because of the decline of the coal industry and its employees. It led to a lot of job loss. It led to shrinking populations and limited tax bases. Because incomes remained low, many households couldn't afford to get housing upgrades, nor did they have the foundations to do so. And so, as a result, much of the existing housing stock is old in many Appalachian counties. So, more than half of these homes were built before the 1970s. These homes are more expensive to maintain because of that. They're energy inefficient, and they're just more vulnerable to weather damage, which is not an uncommon thing to happen. Like, weather damage is not irregular in these counties either. Geography also plays a role because of the mountainous terrain and the narrow valleys, which makes large-scale construction difficult and expensive. There's limited flat land, and that means that there's fewer new developments being made, and there's a lower supply growth. So while the U.S. is facing a national shortage of housing, Appalachia's crisis is just layered on top of that because of the long-term economic decline of aging homes, low incomes, the geographic barriers. It really makes the region specifically vulnerable to the national economic pressures like inflation and like rising interest rates. Looking at the housing crisis in Appalachia today, many communities are facing an aging housing stock. So again, some of the oldest in the country. These issues can be like poor insulation, there's mold, there's just structural instability. They're outdated in terms of like electricity and wiring. These homes were already difficult to maintain before inflation dramatically increased, but now it's even harder to get construction and repair costs. Rural areas also suffer from limited supply, so it's not as simple as building new developments. Geography restricts how and where homes can be built, and many countries lack available land or lack available flat land. When disasters strike, such as devastating floods like the Eastern Kentucky floods or the hurricane that hit through, or the hurricane that hit through North Carolinas and Ashe County, it is very difficult to repair these homes, and I've seen that homes are being lost faster than they can be replaced. Mortgage rates can also hit Appalachia especially hard. So with lower incomes and higher poverty rates, families who are already on the edge of affordability have been priced out of homeownership. Many Households rely on mobile homes that are aging and deteriorating, and financing improvements is difficult because traditional mortgages aren't available for manufactured housing. In short, Appalachia experiences the national crisis in a much more magnified way. The houses are just more fragile, they're older, there's fewer homes, and they just don't have the economic and geographical resources to recover. Um, yeah. So then I did an economic analysis of this crisis. I thought it would be an interesting thing to analyze. So one of the key macroeconomic components of this is inflation and cost. There's a lot of cost push inflation, and after the pandemic, building materials and labor costs went up sharply. When the cost of production increases, builders supply fewer homes and prices rise. Supply chain disruptions also contributed. So even after COVID restrictions ended, many manufacturers and transportation networks struggled to return to full capacity. These long-term pressures kept construction prices um, elevated, making it more expensive to build or repair homes in both urban and rural areas, but definitely in Appalachia, especially. Sorry, I forgot to change it to this slide, but okay, so now we're looking at monetary policy. So to fight inflation, the Federal Reserve increased interest rates several times. Higher interest rates led directly to higher mortgage rates. When mortgage rates jump up, people borrow less, and fewer families can afford to buy homes. Higher rates also reduce investment in housing construction. Developers rely on loans to finance their projects, and when those loans become more expensive, builders hold back. In economic terms, this means that there is a decrease in investment. So it's the I in GDP, and there's a slowdown in new housing supply. So now looking at the aggregate demand and supply, raising price interest rates shift the demand for housing downward because higher monthly payments push buyers out of the market. So at the same time, inflation and high construction costs are decreasing aggregate supply. So this combination, falling demand and restricted supply, are worsening the overall housing shortages. Even if fewer people are buying homes, we still don't have enough housing to meet long-term demand, especially in regions like Appalachia. Okay, so then looking at unemployment. In Appalachia, unemployment challenges are really going beyond the business cycle. When coal mining and manufacturing declined and pulled out of the region, it really suffered structural unemployment. Workers could not easily transition into new industries or leave the region, and it led to persistent jobless and lower incomes. And so, lower incomes meant that there's a weaker demand for housing. So, even if homes are available or are being built, many families simply cannot afford them in this region. And this prevents the housing market from recovering, and it keeps many families in substandard housing conditions or not good, substantial housing conditions. Um, and then we look at fiscal policy. This was the last thing an economic analysis I got from looking into this. The government does attempt to address the problem through programs like HUD funding, USDA rural development loans, and the home program. Also through like Habitat for Humanity, which was something that I had worked with when I was in Appalachia. And these really support affordable housing and repairs. These programs are especially important to rural areas, where private developers are really rarely investing. However, these programs are often underfunded relative to the scale of the crisis, so there's not enough money being pumped into it. There's a lot of budget constraints, and it limits how many homes can be repaired or built, and the process is very slow. So when fiscal policy helps, it can't fully reverse the decades of underinvestment and economic decline that this region has faced, even if it tries. Um, so there are, some policy respondents and solutions that we can look into. So some solutions that helped address the housing crisis include increasing federal housing investment. So again, through the HUD, the home program, USDA, rural relief development, these would expand both the construction of new units and repair older ones. Builders also need incentives to work in rural areas where profits margins are a lot lower. Another important area is infrastructure. So many communities lack the broadband or the water or the transportation system that is needed to support new housing. Workforce development programs could reduce structural unemployment by helping former coal workers transition into maybe construction or healthcare or renewable energy, fields that are growing in that region. Strengthening these areas would not only improve housing availability, but it would also stimulate local economies and improve long-term economic growth for Appalachia. And then just in my conclusion, and just overall, there is a U.S. housing crisis where there is supply shortages and inflation and higher interest rates. But Appalachia is facing a very deep problem with that, and they're more vulnerable due to the history and the geography of the land. There is macroeconomic forces that really explain why recovery is difficult for this region and why we haven't gotten there yet after all of these years, even before COVID. And the policy solutions are really requiring long-term investment, not quick fixes, which throughout my research and my time when I've been in Appalachia, I've seen that a lot of the problems think to be solved by quick fixes. And then here's just some of the resources I used. I used like a video that taught me a lot. Some of the stuff I honestly didn't know a little bit about just from talking to people from Habitat. The Graph, CNBC, The Economist. And yeah, thank you.